Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our presentation about the natural approach. So, for this presentation, we are going to take into account these 4 steps. First, how is the natural approach? Second, how is the perspective of the language? Third, the 5 hypotheses of the second language acquisition. And finally, the fourth one is which activities we can use in the natural approach. So, how is the natural approach? In the natural approach, the teacher should speak in the target language. For that reason, the students also need to speak in the foreign language. This is because this works like the input for the acquisition of this second language. The errors present in the speech of the students are not correct, but it's necessary that in the homework all the grammar mistakes are corrected. The goal of the natural approach is to emphasize the student to be able to use the foreign language to express ideas, problems, and some solutions. However, its main weakness is that this use of the language can limit in some degree the expression or the production of the students. For that reason, the student or the students could be find this activity or this type of learning like irrelevant or not interesting. It's necessary to remind that the natural approach was developed to beginners that want to become intermediates. For that reason, the student not need to understand each word and each structure in grammar aspects. They only need to know what is going on in the target situation. They need to understand the foreign speaker. For that reason, in this approach, grammar and syntax are not important. The most important part is that the production will be understandable and the speaker will be able to understand the foreign speaker. So this happened because the natural approach is about the acquisition, not learning.
Now we have the perspective of the language in the natural approach. The first one is no attention to a proper theory of language. It means that the teacher does not focus on theory or meta language. The second one is rejection of grammatical views of language, and it means that in the natural approach it is not important the grammar. The third one is communication as the primary function of the language. Everything that is taught of the foreign language is in order to communicate. And finally, lexical items, structures, and messages. Kids acquire vocabulary or expressions to express their ideas and meaning. Everything is focused on sending a message. There are 5 hypotheses of second language acquisition created by Krashen. The first one is acquisition learning hypothesis. The acquired system or acquisition is the product of a subconscious process very similar to the process children undergo when they acquire their first language. It requires meaningful interaction in target language in which speakers are concentrated not in the form of their utterances, but in the communicative act. Meanwhile, the learned system or learning is a product of formal instruction and it compromises a conscious process which results in conscious knowledge about the language. For example, knowledge of grammar rules. A deductive approach in a teacher-centered setting produces learning, while an inductive approach in a student-centered setting leads to acquisition. We can see the acquisition hypothesis during our lesson plan because we're not teaching kids about grammar, we're not giving them the name of the topic either, but rather we are creating an environment related to real life with which they can interact and learn subconsciously.
The affected filter states that there are some affected variables that are related with the success of the failure of this approach. It means that teacher has to create a good atmosphere in order to promote the participation of the students. And also it is necessary to avoid the anxiety in the students. You can notice the affected filter in the next example.
The monitor hypothesis. The monitoring function is the practical result of the learned grammar. According to Krashen, the acquisition system is the utterance initiator, while the learning system provides the monitor or the editor. The monitor has to plan, edit, or correct the students. The monitor also needs to pay attention if the students understood or not the topic and if they are be able or not to correct themselves. The monitor hypothesis was presented in our lesson plan when Carolina demanded to our students to create their own map. In this map, they are going to show us how was the acquisition of the topic that we were explained before.
The natural order hypothesis states that language can be acquired and not necessarily learned. It means that children can acquire the language as they acquire their first language. Moreover, it is relevant to mention that some structures are acquired earlier than others. This can be seen in the following example.
The input hypothesis. The input hypothesis corresponds of the acquisition part and not the learning part. Taking into account the idea of this hypothesis, the student or the learner improves or progresses along the natural order when he or she are receiving the new information in the second language. This information normally is present one step beyond his or her level. That means that the student are acquire information that is not common or is not present before to them. Also, the input hypothesis was presented in our lesson plan when we were using a topic like giving directions and places of the city or of the neighborhood, and that was also the reason that we were using videos and not our voices.
So now we can talk about some tips that teachers can use in order to introduce new topics with their students. So at first, the topic of the activities must be interesting and meaningful in order to focus the students' attention on the content of the speech instead of form. Throughout acquisition activities, teachers can introduce new vocabulary. Also, he or she has to provide comprehensible input in them. Also, teachers can give chances to produce oral productions, and finally, he or she has or can apply the affected filter in their students. Okay guys, that's all. It was the natural approach. So thank you for watching.